Welcome to Drinks in the Library, the only library where drinks aren't just allowed, they are required. I'm your librarian host, Gigi Howard, and each episode I'll be interviewing a guest about a much-loved book that we will be pairing with a drink for you to enjoy along with us or consider for your next book club meetup. As always, stay curious and support your local library. Hello, Libration Nation. This week, we are discussing Dog Songs, the heartwarming poetry collection by Mary Oliver. Joining me is Amanda Sue Creasey, a high school English teacher and outdoors writer for Cooperative Living magazine. Her novel, An Unexpected End, was published in 2023. She holds undergraduate degrees in German, English, and secondary education from Michigan State University and a graduate degree in creative writing from the University of Denver. Her work appears in 3 Chicken Soup for the Souls books, and her poetry, outdoor journalism, and nature photography have earned recognition from the Poetry Society of Virginia and Virginia Outdoors Writers Association. Our drink this week, we went with a peppermint tea. Tea is such a good pairing for poetry, and we enjoyed sipping it as the nights get colder and colder. All right, and just before we get started, as always, if you're enjoying the show, please share it with friends, like and review wherever you get your podcast. And without further ado, here is Dog Songs by Mary Oliver. All right, so Amanda Sue, I'm so glad to have you here with me tonight, and we're going to be talking about Dog Songs by the illustrious Mary Oliver.
Yeah.
But yeah, who are you?
I think it's natural, and maybe this is sad a little bit, but it's natural maybe to lead with my career. Mm-hmm. I'm a high school English teacher, so this is a very lovely podcast experience for me because it's a subject near and dear to my heart with the literature. I've been teaching at the same high school since I started teaching in 2006. Same classroom and everything. Creature of habit here. I'm also a novelist. My debut novel came out actually a year ago last week.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
Congrats. One
Thank
year.
You. I know. My launch party was a year ago. As of this recording, a year ago yesterday.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So
have to have another anniversary of the launch party.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then I'm an outdoors writer as well. I do the Explore More column. It's bi-monthly for Cooperative Living magazine.
Okay.
Lots of writing, lots of reading. And I'm a dog mom, and I have a parrot. Married.
Okay.
Those are the basics.
Where'd the parrot come from?
We had him, actually, his gotcha day is Halloween. Oh. We'll have had him for a year. He's almost 24 years old. And my mother-in-law had a really good friend who had Archie, that's his name, for his whole life, I think, if not almost his whole life. And she needed to rehome him. And I don't exactly know why she thought of us, but she asked my mother-in-law if we would be interested in adopting Archie. And we were, and it's been lovely. He's delightful. Wow. Yeah, he's adorable.
Very cool. How long do parrots usually live?
His species can live, the average lifespan for his species is about 30 years. So he's in his golden years, but he's doing very well.
I imagine he's still feisty.
He's very feisty. He's got a big personality in that little green body. Yes.
Yeah. And I knew this already because we corresponded a little bit, but clearly you are an animal lover and a dog lover specifically.
Yes. Very much. I would say that's a huge part of my identity. I think it probably drives my husband crazy. I know it drives my husband crazy. Think is generous.
Is he how does he feel about dogs?
He also loves dogs.
Okay.
I don't think he could exist without a dog in the house. I don't think either one of us could exist very well without a dog in the house or multiple dogs in the house. He's an animal lover too, but I'm an animal lover like to the nth degree.
Well, and I could tell when we were talking about it, and so you suggested Dog Songs by Mary Oliver, and you said you'd read it multiple times already and coming back to it again, and so I thought that was so special. I hadn't done any poetry yet on here. So tell us, who were you the first time you read? dog songs?
So the first time I read it was actually fairly recently. I can't remember if it was before or after COVID, but it's been within 5 years, so give or take COVID time. But we were visiting my mother-in-law who lives in the Outer Banks, and she has this coffee table that's always stacked with like magazines and books and different reading material. And her copy of Dog Songs was on the coffee table. And of course, dogs and Mary Oliver. I was like, oh, that's for me. And so I just sat down on her couch and I read it straight through. And I loved it so much that I immediately bought my own copy, which you can tell is quite well loved.
Yeah.
And I've read my own copy straight through multiple times too. I don't know how many times.
Yeah.
So.
What is the experience like reading it? What is it like for you to read this?
It's meditative, I think, for me. It puts me in a very peaceful, thoughtful, introspective state of mind. And I also, when I read this, I was like, oh my gosh, Mary Oliver, I wish you were still here and we could be friends. Like, I feel like she's like a kindred spirit for me. So much of the poetry, I'm like, oh, I should have written that. Why didn't I write that? That is exactly how I feel. And I wish I had said it that way.
I guess to be a poet, you have to be this way, but someone that's very in touch with who they are at their core is just okay with that seeping out.
And I think that's one thing I like about Mary Oliver in general. Obviously, this is the work of hers that I'm most familiar with, but I've read other things that she's written and been exposed to other works of hers. But she does seem very solid in who she is and what she knows about herself and what she views as her priorities in the world and her purpose in the world. And I really admire that. I wish I had a little more of that in me, a little more of that kind of like, confidence is not the right word, but maybe like stalwartness. I don't know, just this solid sense of who you are and what your purpose in the world is as you move through it.
Yeah, it's very, she's definitely inspiring. And we're going to keep talking about the book, but we always have to talk about what we're drinking.
Oh, yes. Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
And I'm very excited about this. So we're drinking, I think it's called Choice Organics Peppermint Tea. I am a big fan of peppermint tea.
I'm a big fan of all tea.
Okay.
I haven't met a tea I don't like.
Yeah. And it was hard for us to come to land on one thing with Mary Oliver because she drinks, I read she drank a lot of coffee, but it is 6 o'clock at night.
Yes.
You are not a coffee drinker.
I'm a coffee sniffer.
Yeah.
That's as close as it gets.
Yes. But I love peppermint tea. I just think it's so refreshing and relaxing, especially this time of day. There's a vanilla peppermint tea that we always buy at this time of year.
That sounds delicious.
So you can only get it at Christmas, or like right before Christmas.
Yeah, that sounds fabulous.
Yeah. So anyway, this is very good too. So I think this is just like you're saying, like some meditative work, and to sit there and to be reading this and just warm up with a nice tea.
I was talking to my husband. We were walking the dogs before I came over here, and I was talking to him. I said, talking to him about the struggle of our trying to figure out what to drink. And I said, but tea seems like the perfect pairing for poetry. Like poetry and tea and dogs. Could you ask for a better evening? I don't know.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. And then coming back to dog songs, let's talk about what are these poems like? What is their content? Who are their characters?
Their characters are obviously dogs. There are multiple dogs featured in the poem. Benny is one of them. Percy is one of them. Benjamin is one of them. Those are the 3 that come to mind. It might be the 3 that she has the most poems about. I'm not sure, but those are the 3 that like really stand out to me as being characters, and they are characters. She does a great job in this book of really painting the personalities of each of the individual dogs in the poems about them. There's also an essay. Oh, Luke is one. There's also an essay or 2 at the very end about some of the dogs. It's not just poetry, but it's largely poetry. But yeah, the characters are all dogs, and they're all just delightful little creatures that you wish you knew. Yeah. Or you feel like you knew them by the time you're done reading her poems about them.
Yeah. She seems very able to get in touch. She seems like it's easy for her to get in touch with them and to see them and their individual personalities.
Yeah, and she's very imaginative, I think, in the way she portrays what they must be thinking and what their experience must be like. Some of the poems, if you were to look in the back and see when they were originally published, like some of the poems are pretty progressive in terms of what she was imagining the dogs were experiencing. Studies that have come out in recent years
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I read Alexander Horowitz's book, Inside of a Dog, What Dogs See, Smell, and Know. It talks about the way that dogs experience the world, largely through their sense of smell, but it talks about all kinds of things, like what their umwelt might be, like how they experience the world. And it's a fairly recent book within the last few years, and some of these poems were written 15, 20 years ago, but they're just spot on. Her imagination was just she was so in tune with the dogs that she was observing and loving, and it's just... I love that.
Yeah. Can you expand any more on how dogs experience the world for those of us that haven't read the book?
I'm sure it's obvious, but dogs experience the world largely through their sense of smell. That's their primary sense. And one thing I learned in Horowitz's book is that the amount of information they can get from a single smell is amazing. Like, they don't necessarily conceptualize it the way we would, but they can tell, for example, how old a dog was who had urinated on that mailbox, how old they were, what they ate, how long it had been since they'd been there, if they were sick, if they were healthy. They can even potentially detect the mood of the other dog when it marked that mailbox. That's amazing. And then she goes in to talk about some of the psychology of dogs and how they may be perceiving the way we treat them. And we may think we're treating them in a way that affects a certain emotion or reaction, but the way they're perceiving our treatment is not necessarily affecting the emotion that we're hoping to affect or that we're thinking we're communicating to them.
Yeah. I think that they don't have an ego, right?
Right. No. She's another one, Alexander Horowitz, that I wish I were friends with. Like, I remember her book, now we're like talking about two books, but they're related. Her book is a mix of like scientific studies and personal anecdotes. And she does it so well that even the scientific studies are told in a very narrative, engaging manner, even though they're scientific and they're factual and they're data driven. But one thing and I read the book several years ago, but one thing I really appreciated about it was she said, all the behaviorists say, like, you shouldn't roll around with your dog on the floor and get all excited when you get home because it can foster anxiety and separation anxiety. And she said, but that was one thing I just wasn't willing to give up because it was so special to me to come home and just roll around with my dog on the floor. And I was like, oh, I'm so glad you said that because I was starting to feel like I shouldn't be doing that. And I love doing that. And my dogs love doing that. She talks about just a very relatable piece of literature, especially for what's essentially a scientific nonfiction work. It's enjoyable to read. It's not arduous. It's not tedious. It's lovely.
Yeah. And going back to Mary Oliver, so she was so intuitive to know all of that without having done the research or the studies. What are some of your favorite poems? Do you have a favorite poem in the story?
Ask me that. I do. I have multiples, but one. So as I mentioned, I'm a teacher. And so in April, which is National Poetry Month, my classes, my students are assigned a poetry project. And I created an example one and present it to them just to give them a feel of what I'm expecting and what I'm looking for. And my project focuses on this particular poem from this book. And it's called The First Time Percy Came Back. It's pretty short. Do you want me to?
Yeah, I'd love if you read it.
All right. The first time Percy came back, he was not sailing on a cloud. He was loping along the sand as though he had come a great way. Percy, I cried out and reached to him. Those white curls. But he was unreachable. As music is present, yet you can't touch it. Yes, it's all different, he said. You're going to be very surprised. But I wasn't thinking of that. I only wanted to hold him. Listen, he said. I miss that too. And now you'll be telling stories of my coming back, and they won't be false, and they won't be true, but they'll be real. And then, as he used to, he said, let's go. And we walked down the beach together.
Oh, I teared up.
I know. I had to exercise some very serious self-control. I don't think I've ever read that poem, even though I've read that poem 98 times. I don't think I've ever read it without getting emotional.
Yeah. It just, if you've ever had a dog, that experience of imagining what they would be like if they came back.
Yeah. So. And I think with this particular poem, really, I have like my own poem that I wrote in response to it in the margin, and my notes, and I've dog-eared every little piece of the page on that poem that I can. So our dogs now are Nacho and Soda. Aww. And they are littermates that we adopted from the Richmond SPCA. Okay. And they're so cute. And they're precious. And before them, we had two other dogs that one of them was a rescue, one of them was like a pseudo rescue. She was like a $50 beagle on the side of the road, you know? And so we had those two. And Jack passed away in April 2019 when he was 14 years old. And Sadie passed away in June 2019. And so it was a very close loss. Like,
Yeah.
it was almost exactly 2 months. It was really hard. And a couple days after Jack passed away, we used to always take a morning walk. And during when we would have been walking, maybe 2 or 3 days after he passed away, I took a run instead. But I ran a route that he and I used to walk as just in honor. And I got maybe half a mile from my house, and I'm running, and I'm feeling some kind of way.
Yeah.
And I all of a sudden, right in front of me, there was this black sock.
Oh.
And Jack's thing was our socks and our shoes. He would pick them up and take them, and he'd stash them places, and he'd play with them, and he'd had a shoe in the backyard, and he'd want it there. And if you'd bring it in and put it away, he would take it and put it back where he wanted it. And when I'd get home from work and have my gym bag, he'd wait for me to give him a sock. Get up in the morning, he'd wait for a sock. So when I saw this sock, I just had such an overwhelming sense of Jack did that. Like, I really felt, oh, Jack is here.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what this poem is. Like, when she sees the waves that look like Percy's coat and she has this conversation with him, that is exactly how I felt when I saw that sock. And we still find socks to this day. I found a sock in the middle of a hiking trail Wednesday.
Oh.
I'll be in a parking lot at a gas station, and they're just everywhere. And every time I'll take a picture and send it to my husband. Or if he finds a sock, he'll send it to me, because we feel like it's Jack coming back, just like she talks about Percy coming back.
Yeah.
And it's such a comforting, it's emotional, but it's so comforting. Like, I'll see a sock and I'll be like, hi, Jack.
Yeah.
I know you're here.
Yeah.
Some kind of way.
Not just animals, but I do feel like you carry the love that you have always with you. It's part of your aura.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
I cry over nothing.
No,
So
I don't exactly know how I held it together while I was reading it, but I do read it to my students. I have to, like, center myself, and I read it 3 times a day that day, because I read it to all the classes. And so every time I'm like, okay, I hope this isn't going to be the one where I lose it. It's going to happen eventually.
Yeah. And can I get you to put your teacher hat on for a second and talk about poetry a little bit and the value of poetry and what we should be experiencing when we're reading poetry? And are you comfortable just launching it? Because I think a lot of people, I don't know if everybody is comfortable with poetry. And so I think,
I don't think they are. I think a lot of people hear poetry and they're like, oh, poetry, I don't understand it. That's the word I'm looking for. Amorphous and ambiguous. And it never doesn't make sense to me. And I think this book in particular, the poems are so accessible. I mean, the poem I just read, even if you don't like poetry and you don't understand poetic devices, it's pretty straightforward. It's a very emotionally impactful poem, but it doesn't have a whole lot of necessarily symbolism or anything that's particularly difficult to grasp. All poetry is different, right? There's certainly that poetry out there, and hers has it. But even if that part isn't accessible to you, you can understand the emotional value of the poem. And for me, as a reader, and even as a teacher who analyzes literature and a writer who makes very deliberate decisions and choices in my own writing for stylistic purposes, for me, the emotional impact of any work, be it poetry or narrative essay or novel, for me, the priority is the emotional impact. How does this work make me feel? And why does it make me feel that way? And I think poetry's power is in its brevity, which is why it's very hard for me to write. I'm a little bit verbose. I do write it sometimes, but it's a struggle for me. But right now, with attention spans being what they are and everything being whatever it is, 140 characters, poetry can be particularly accessible because poetry can be very short. A poem is typically, unless it's an epic poem or something, it's typically a very small package, and it packs a really large punch in a tiny amount of space. And look at this. If you look at a page, I mean, I know our listeners can't see this, but if you look at a page in a novel, it can look very blocky and overwhelming. If you look at a poem, it's got these stanzas, it's got these short little lines. Oh, I can read that in 20 seconds. Yeah. I might not understand it in 20 seconds, but I can read it in 20 seconds. And a book of poetry too, I can read a poem and put it down. And if I don't have time to read again for 2 months, it's okay. I'll read the next poem. It doesn't necessarily I don't even have to remember the first one for the next one to make sense or to speak to me. And then, of course, we could get into the real value of the literary devices and the poetic techniques. But I think just for everyday people who aren't studying poetry and analyzing it line by line, and the value is the brevity and the emotional punch that such a short piece can offer.
Yeah, definitely. And she talks about animals, but she's very well known for writing about nature and outdoors.
Yes.
And does she get into some of that in this book? Or?
She does a little bit. One of the themes of the book I've noticed, or maybe, I don't know, theme might not be the right word. Maybe motif is more accurate, but one of the traits, I guess I'll go with, of this book is that she links dogs and the fact that they straddle this kind of liminal space between domestic and wild.
Let's explain what a liminal space is.
Okay,
real
I'll
quick.
let you.
Oh,
is that fair?
I know.
Since you want to explain it.
No, because I was in a meeting the other day and somebody said liminal spaces, and half the people were like, "What's a liminal space?"
Weren't we just talking about accessible poetry?
I'm going to get it totally wrong, but from what I understand, like a liminal space, if you're talking about like a building,
Yeah.
let's say it's the stairs.
Yeah.
It's the space between
the first floor and the second floor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Hence the straddle, like the dog straddling this.
Yeah, and I apologize for interrupting, but I was literally in a meeting.
That's valid. It's totally valid.
Yeah.
It's very valid to connect what we're talking about to your real life. That's one reason I love this book. Like, it connects to me on, like, a very visceral, personal level. But, yeah, she connects dogs and their ability to straddle these two worlds of where they came from in their wild days to where they are in their domestic days, and to our ability, or sometimes lack thereof, to connect to our own natural wild side. And so I think Mary Oliver, and this is just me projecting, I haven't talked to her, obviously, but I get the sense from works of hers that I've read that she feels like, and this is a modern idea too, that humans are not separate from nature. For a long time, we've tried to separate ourselves from nature, and we felt like, oh, we're people, those are animals. This is inside, that is outside, but all of it's really tied together and connected. And this Dog Songs, I think, tries to show that we can help ourselves access that natural part of ourselves through connecting with our dogs, through letting them be dogs and watching their doggy experience and being present and mindful with them in those experiences. That allows us to access some sort of primitive part of ourselves that we have locked away in our tendency to be civilized and societal and all those things.
Yeah. No, I agree with that too. I think because it's honestly, and this is getting away from poetry and it's getting away from Mary Oliver, but it is talking about the fact that it's only within the last 100 years, a couple hundred years, that we have things like electricity and air conditioning and refrigeration. And even when I was growing up, it was still like go outside and play in the creek all day.
And I loved that.
Yeah, I did too. And I will say, my daughter, we have a good, solid neighborhood around here. Yes, she does get out quite a bit. Beautiful spot. But I do think that there is something lost when we try to say that we're above it all.
Yeah, I think so too. I've been taking a nature writing class with another writer who just had a book come out. Her name's Vanessa Shakur. I might be saying her last name wrong. But she just had a book come out. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my bookshelf. It's called Earthly Bodies, I think. And it's about rewilding ourselves and reconnecting with our wild roots. I feel like when people hear that, they're going to think I'm like some hippie chick. And I'm not. Like that term is not, that's not like what that means. But recognizing that we are animals too, and that we are part of the natural world, and that every animal and insect and plant we encounter is an individual just like we are, with no less right to occupy that space or that time than we have. I think as humans, we have this idea of, illimitable dominion. And we really need to come around, and I think this book does touch on that. We really need to a view that's one more of stewardship than of, what's the word I'm looking, use up the resources, exploitation.
Okay.
That's the word I'm looking for.
Okay.
We tend to see resources as all of ours, but there's usually a lot of other living creatures that rely on those resources too. Yeah. And we need to figure out a way to share them. And I think that comes across in some of these poems, too, with the dogs. And how one of the poems, I don't remember which one, talks about how dogs are good, but then they forget because they revert back to their wild selves. But they're not being bad. They're just being dogs. And you have to take them for what they are and appreciate that instead of imposing this human view of what a good dog is. What we think is a good dog is not necessarily a good dog. Like a dog is a dog is a dog. She has a poem in here that's like a puppy is a puppy. If you're not expecting a puppy for a puppy's puppyhood, then you might be disappointed or angry or frustrated. That's on you.
Yeah.
Not on the puppy.
Right. Yeah. You've opened it to a certain page. Do you have something there?
Yeah. So I'm sure you've noticed I have random notes throughout.
I love that. I love it. I have the library copy, so it was frowned upon.
Yes, especially for a librarian.
Yeah.
Do not damage the library property.
No.
Yeah, I wrote in here themes I noticed. Dogs should be let free to live by their nature, and we should similarly try to embrace our nature. And then actually what I just said, which I didn't even realize I'd written here, like a dog is a dog. Mm-hmm. And she writes about the puppy as a puppy in the first poem, which is appropriately called How It Begins, because that begins the book. And then she also talks about puppies. And of course, the puppy is the beginning of the dog.
Of this dog. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that. Do you read poetry a lot? Is this...
I don't, actually.
Okay.
I love poetry. I don't know why I don't read a lot of it, because every time I do read it, I feel very just like, I feel more equipped to write, no matter what I'm writing, if I read poetry. But I don't read a lot of poetry, and I don't know why. If I'm being honest, I don't get to read as much as I'd like to read, period.
Yeah.
Be it poetry or novels or anything.
I get that.
Yeah, just being an adult that's alive, there's so many stupid responsibilities, like the minutia of life you have to take care of when you'd rather be reading or doing something else. But I don't read a whole lot of poetry. I maybe read more than like your average adult, but I would say compared to readers, I probably don't read as much poetry as like a bibliophile necessarily reads, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, it's hard to get to everything. And then I always find... I don't know. This is my personal journey, but I always have to read other things besides. I don't know. I would like to maybe get to a point in my life, but I would require me not doing this podcast or doing some other things.
Everything's a trade-off, right?
Everything is a trade-off. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed reading this, and I've enjoyed other poems by Mary Oliver. I haven't read all of them.
Me neither.
But let's see. What is theirs? She's won... What has she won?
A bunch of things. I don't know all of them. Numerous awards.
Yeah,
Pulitzer Prize.
She's won the Pulitzer Prize. She won the National Book Award.
Residencies. Lots of residencies.
She was considered America's best-selling poet.
That does not surprise me.
Yeah.
I feel like she deserves that designation.
And I think her most famous poem, if I recall, is the Wild Geese poem. The Wild Geese, I will just read the first part of it because it's so beautiful. But it's, you do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. And it goes on after that. But that's going into what you were talking about of recognizing your animal self and not getting so caught up in all the things we modern humans get caught up in.
All the things that we prioritize that maybe aren't as important as some other things that we don't prioritize.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any other poems in here that you really loved?
There are so many. I started at one point dog-earing the ones I really loved, and then
it's half the book.
It's like every other page is dog-eared. Let's see. What I did do, I had to resort to dog-earing the bottom of pages to make them like stand out. So I dog-eared, I marked... I know people hear I dog-eared this book, and some of them are going to be like, you're a monster. As I reread it, I had mentioned that I was like, oh, I wish I could be friends with Mary Oliver. I feel like we share so many of the same values with dogs and otherwise. And so I marked some of the poems that made me feel like I got her or made me feel like she got me through the pages. So one, it's very short. It's called If You Are Holding This Book. And I wrote, reason number 1, we'd be friends in the margin. And I can share it if it's 5 lines. So you may not agree, you may not care, but if you are holding this book, you should know that of all the sights I love in this world, and there are plenty, very near the top of the list is this one, dogs without leashes.
You can relate to that.
Very much. I feel like I was actually talking to somebody about this the other day, because my dogs do really well off leash. They're little and they're tiny and they have great callback, and and I feel, and a lot of behaviorists agree, that off leash time is invaluable to a dog being able to be a dog. But in the society we live in, that's really hard because we've created situations where dogs are reactive, and we've created situations where there's traffic, and we've created situations where it's dangerous for your dog to be off leash for them and for other dogs and for wildlife and various reasons. It's irresponsible in a lot of contexts. And I was like, I wish there were parks where you could go through a training course and get a certificate that says, okay, I passed the course and my dogs are certified in this area to be off their leashes. Because there are very few places where that's allowed. Dog parks are a big one, but my dogs are terrified of dog parks, so that doesn't work for them.
No.
They're just so little. They weigh 9 pounds and 10 pounds respectively. So they like other dogs, but they feel very overwhelmed at a dog park. So that's not a good off-leash option for us. Obviously, they're off-leash in our yard. But it's our yard. It's a pretty familiar space. And when I read that, I was like, yeah, I love that too. Because one of my happiest images is when we're out somewhere in the woods away from everybody and I can let them off. And they're they might run down the trail 20 feet and I say, littles, because that's what we call them, littles. And they stop and they run back to me and they're just exuberant in their freedom. It's just like the happiest sight. And they're so much faster than I am. And they're so much more agile than I am. And I'm an anchor when I'm on the other end of the leash.
Yeah. Are there any more that we should get to?
Yeah. Oh, how much time do we have, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's another one I marked, like reason number 2, we'd be friends, which this one's not long. None of them are super long, but Bear was one of her dogs. And in the poem, she's going to go on a trip and she has booked Bear an appointment. Do you remember this one?
I very much remember this one.
And the very last line of the poem is, I canceled the trip. And that's a result of her realizing like how much Bear is going to miss her.
And that part made me sad too, because we had a dog and he passed away last year.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
No wonder you cried when I read that.
You get to know me long enough, I cry over everything.
I do too. I respect that, actually. You are in touch with your natural side.
Oh, good.
You let those tears flow.
I'll pick up where you were saying. So she's talking about booking the kennel for Bear.
Yes.
And it definitely just reminded me of our experiences when we had to leave our dog. And she says he overhears me booking the kennel. And Bear says about the kennel, love and company, said Bear, are the adornments that change everything. I know they'll be nice to me, but I'll be sad. And pitifully he wrung his paws. And then she says, and I canceled the trip.
Yeah. I love that poem. I drew a heart next to that. I'm highlighted it. And of course, in that particular poem, there's a little bit of anthropomorphism that some people frown upon, but I don't care. Oh, I love the image of him wringing his paws. That's such a powerful little image. And such good personification and the repetition of sad. I would tell my students, that's a weak word. Find a stronger word. But it's perfect there.
Yeah.
It's perfect there. The simplicity of a dog, just not knowing when or if you're coming back. And yeah, they're nice to me here, but you're my person.
Yeah, definitely.
You're my person.
I wanted to pause for a second with talking about Mary Oliver and talk a little bit about your experience as a writer and your book. And
I would be happy to talk about that.
Yeah.
My experience as a writer is pretty varied. I would say I write everything. I do write a little poetry. I love to write narrative essays. I have a novel, and I'm working on a second novel manuscript, and I have another novel manuscript that needs revision. I just like writing. I like all of it. I'm eclectic in my reading and in my writing. One of the first major pieces I had published was actually a piece about Jack and Sadie that was in a Chicken Soup for the Soul. It was life lessons for the dog, and that was huge for me. And it was especially poignant because it was published in 2019, which was the year they both passed away. And my first event, because I did some readings and some signings and some fundraisers for local animal shelters, my first event Jack and Sadie were going to come to, but Jack passed away just a few days before it. It was within a week. And so I had to go do this event in honor of him at the Richmond SPCA, where he and I took agility courses. And it was really hard.
Gosh, I bet.
I mean, I cried through the whole reading. I stood up to read, and I think I got through 3 words before I was crying.
Yeah.
But it raised money for the shelter, and Sadie was there. We had a portrait of Jack there to represent him, and I had a few more readings of that one. And there are 2 other pieces that are about them in different Chicken Soup for the Souls. But one of them, I actually have the bookmark. I was using it in this, is The Magic of Dogs. There's a story about Jack and Sadie in that, and an essay I wrote about the littles won a grant for the SPCA. It was, it was about how just destitute I felt after Jack and Sadie were both gone. Like, I had not known adult life without a dog. When I met my husband, he had Sadie. She was 6 months old. And then we got Jack. And then when they were gone, it'd been my whole adult life. Like, I did not know my house without dogs. And so I'd come home from work and be like,
I know.
What do I do? Like, what am I supposed to do now?
Yeah.
And so I wrote this essay about how lost I felt and how my day lost all its structure. And then the littles came in and it felt like Jack and Sadie had told the littles ahead of time, this is how you be their dogs. I mean, they were puppies and they just knew everything. It was amazing. And so that essay was about healing and grief and all those things. And then my debut novel has a dog in it, naturally. His name is Toby. He's a black German Shepherd. I don't know why. I've never had a German Shepherd in my life. And the other manuscript has a dog in it named Argos, which, interestingly enough, my brother just adopted a dog, but I took that name first, so it just seemed like an interesting serendipitous thing.
Yeah.
And the novel I'm writing right now actually takes place during the Salem witch trials. Okay. And I think I can't have a dog in it because dogs often had very unfortunate... It was Puritan times. It was they had different views back then of animals. And so probably won't have a dog in it, even though that hurts me. But it does have a snake, and the snake's going to be a little lovely creature, too.
Okay. That's exciting. Okay, very cool. And then I guess we'll just come back really quick to dog songs because I wanted to ask you, who would you recommend this book for?
Anybody? But this is a book that actually I have bought for several friends and neighbors when their dogs have passed away as like a momentum. And I always tell them, I'm like, read this when you're ready because if things are raw, like it's going to hurt. It still hurts when I read it now with Jack and Sadie, but it's a different kind of hurt. I don't know. It's a more of an appreciative, grateful hurt instead of this raw, somebody ripped my heart out on this page hurt. But I do think it's good for people who have recently lost a beloved dog because it's just you're not alone kind of book. Like, you're not alone in your pain. You're not alone in your love. You're not alone in having these memories of your dog. And of course, everybody's dog is an individual and everybody's grief is very singular and everybody's relationship with their dog is very unique. But the universal idea of having this bond and this responsibility and this loyalty is in this book. And I think it's just, like I said, when I read it, I feel like she's talking to me and we're friends and she gets me. And I think for someone who's grieving a dog they lost, that can be a really comforting thing.
Definitely. It was funny we're talking about this because it was, even though our dog has been gone over a year, I still look over sometimes to where he would sit sometimes, and I think he's there.
Yeah.
And it's been over a year, and it's just, they're so involved in your life.
Yeah, yeah. We don't have human children. We had Jack and Sadie, and now we have Nacho, Soda, and Archie, and plan my days around them. Like, when we were trying to figure out the date for this, my husband's off on Tuesdays. So I was like, okay, I really want it to be a day when Maddie's off, because I don't want to work all day and come home for an hour and then leave them again. Like, I want them to have somebody home. Just little things like that you are so used to doing that I think some people who maybe don't have pets see as an inconvenience. I mean, it is. Yeah. But it's just like when you have a human child, you're like willing to do it because the reward is so much greater than the sacrifice.
Yeah. I think everything's a trade-off and it's what is important to you. For sure. For sure. And I know we talked about I know we already talked a little bit about your work, but I wanted to give you a chance to put in a spotlight on, do you know when the next book is coming out? Or
I wish. It'll be a while. I actually just started writing it about 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
I'm taking a novel writing class. Okay. It's a year-long novel writing class. It's called Not MFA, and it's fabulous. And it actually it provided me with the structure and encouragement I needed to finish my debut novel, which is called An Expected End. It would not exist if it weren't for Matt, who's the instructor, also an author. And so I'm really excited about this because I've written 3 chapters so far. So it'll be a while because it's going to be a novel-length work. It's currently, 10,000 words. So it's got a ways to go. Yeah. But it's my first attempt at historical fiction. Okay. An Expected End is speculative literary fiction, which is probably what my wheelhouse has been up to this point in terms of fiction. But I have taught the Crucible for 19 years,
Yeah.
which I know, but in case, I'm sure most listeners do too, but it's a play by Arthur Miller. It's about the Salem witch trials, but it's really about the McCarthy era.
Exactly.
But it's based on real historical people. And
Yeah.
so just in my teaching of that for almost 2 decades, I've learned a lot about the real people. I've been to Salem. I've tried to really bring it to life for my students as much as I can. And Sarah Good is a very minor character in the play, but she was one of the first women accused of witchcraft in Salem. And her story is tragic and harrowing and fascinating and really could say a lot about how women were and sometimes still are treated and how they can be marginalized.
Yeah.
And how they were very frequently marginalized in the past. And so her story is one of tragedy and loss, but there's a lot to be learned from it, and she's somewhat overlooked.
Okay.
So I'm learning a lot. And
Good.
It's a rabbit hole, but it's fun.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, and I'm sure she appreciates someone telling her story.
I hope so. It's funny because I don't know things I read about her. I'm like, I don't know if we'd like each other very much, but I also think your life was so hard that you earned that.
Yeah.
You earned that surliness that you apparently had. You deserve your story told.
Yeah, definitely. And I forgot to ask, is there anything else you wanted to touch on with dog songs that we didn't get to?
I'll think of 97 things when I'm driving home this evening. Not off the top of my head. I did underline a couple things in the last essay that I'll just read as like a little almost manifesto.
Yeah.
If that's okay. So
Yeah.
these are just excerpts that I just underlined. There is not a dog, but we learn from him. A dog is not a possession only, not only the ornament of a human life. They cannot make us sweeter or more kind. Only unleashed dogs can do that. Because of the dog's joyfulness, our own is increased.
It's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming tonight and sharing this peppermint tea and
Yes.
talking all things dogs. And also for the listeners, you have on a dog mom life.
I do, and I wore that on purpose. It was very deliberate.
I love it so much. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, cheers.
Thank you for spending some time with me and my guest for an episode of Drinks in the Library. For more information about the show, you can find us on Instagram at Drinks in the Library, on the World Wide Web, drinksinthelibrary.com, or shoot me an email at drinkspod@gmail.com. Until next time, cheers.